The good news is that more and more Angela Anaconda fans are coming out of hiding. But the bad news is there's still a ton of YouTube comments that call the show creepy. And a lot of people call out the art style in general, but I don't think that's a fair assessment of all clip art or cutout animation, because Monty Python, Jib Jab, and South Park all have a very similar style, and for the most part people don't criticize that. I will say this, I'm somebody who loves the Angela Anaconda style and finds it really beautiful as well as unique. But I'll also acknowledge it is a flawed show, and that includes the animation too. People mostly say things like grayed out faces, the use of real people's pictures, but I wanted to go deeper and give a better explanation as to why people would have such a strong reaction to this particular art style that you don't have with something like Monty Python, Jib Jab, or South Park. So that's what I'm gonna do. This is not a criticism about the artists, this is not a criticism of their talent, because I know the artists were very talented and hardworking when putting this show together. You're going to hear me talk about the uncanny valley a lot in this video, so I'm going to explain what that is. The uncanny valley is a hypothesized relationship of something that looks and feels humanoid, and a human's emotional response to it. Something like a cartoon character we have an emotional response to because it's human-like, but it's not too real. We know it's not real. Versus something that is too close to being a human without actually being human. That's something that causes revulsion or that creep factor, and that's often what people get out of this particular show. The best way I can really sum this show up is it's flawed, but it's got its own personality and a ton of potential. I'm going to be talking about what I noticed with the design and the animation, and then I'm going to go into possible reasons for it. So starting off, the first thing I've noticed is that the gesture drawing is off. In many scenes, particularly in the earliest episodes, the bodies are contorted in very unnatural positions. Take this scene for example. Bodies don't bend that way in real life, even if you're flexible. This is also something that's really noticeable with the head positions, because oftentimes when a character turns, the head moves way further than a head would in real life. Look at this breakdown of Angela's character and compare that to this drawing of a child's proportions in real life and see the difference. Where's her pelvis? There are parts missing. It's very strange how this character's put together. And now noticing this, you can often see in many scenes how the character's top half moves completely separately from the bottom half. So the simulated motion isn't quite complete, which gives it a very disjointed movement to it. And there's also not a ton of in-between with the actual animation, since there were only a few angles taken when capturing a face model. Since there were only a few angles taken, there is a limited range of motion, which can feel very unnatural. It does have a bit of an uncanny valley look to it. Second, the face proportions are not consistent. One thing I said in one of my earliest videos was that the character design wasn't consistent. I wasn't referring to the way the characters are expressing their personalities, because that's really wonderful and you get who these characters are by looking at them. I do regret my choice of words. What I meant to say was that the face proportions are very different from each other. Now, it's good to have a variety of facial features, but look at Angela versus Nanette. Angela's got very realistic proportions for what a human is, versus Nanette, whose face was definitely tampered with and has more cartoonish proportions. So seeing those two next to each other is very odd. A lot of the characters have this look to them too. Some of them have more realistic proportions and some of them have more cartoonish proportions, which can be a pretty awkward blend right next to each other. And especially since real people's pictures were used, The fact that some of the proportions are very realistic and some are more cartoonish creates less of a balance. There are a couple possible reasons why this is. The first is software and technology limitations. I'll start off by saying that Anaconda was designed and boarded as if it were a 2D show, but animated like a 3D show. 3D technology is nothing like it is today, especially in the 90s. This was a show that was made and produced during a time when digital technology was getting started, right before that transition happened. So this was right at the beginning of those awkward years. They also used software that ended up getting discontinued. The big software used to make this show was Elastic Reality. That is what transitioned the face models to the characters. And while I don't know the reason, the fact that it was discontinued and not improved upon, maybe due to unsatisfying production, the other possible reason is the production company itself. At the time, Core Digital Pictures had not made a full series. They were pretty inexperienced with this, and are mostly known for making VFX for early 2000s films. So between the software and the production company, and the time it was made, those are all possible reasons why it looks the way it does and why some of the animation hasn't held up in the last 20 years. Keep in mind, Core Digital Pictures went defunct in 2010, and Elastic Reality was discontinued in 1999. That may explain a little bit better why some people have such a strong reaction to the series, and what may have actually caused that reaction to begin with. But despite that, the show was still a huge phenomenon in its heyday. It had a ton of merchandise, pulled in huge numbers, won a bunch of awards, was nominated for others, and we're still talking about it 20 years later, so it did something right. The interesting thing is, even today, ClipArt animation is still largely unexplored. There's value in animation that isn't owned by Disney, takes big risks, and is largely unexplored overall. This gives exciting new potential for stories in the future, and gives us more variety in terms of our storytelling. Quite frankly, it's exciting to see where animation's gonna go from here, because there's constantly new ways to use this genre, use this style of storytelling, to create new, interesting, and better stories than we've ever seen before.